Hey guys, welcome to another lesson of learning Japanese. Today we are going to cover the verb conjugation of the negativeない form. So if you've been keeping up with the previous videos, then you should know that the negative form that we have covered so far is the polite negative form, which is basically the masen form. This time around we're going to do the negativeない form, which is the casual version of that. So in order to get the hang of conjugating verbs into the negativeない form, we have to split the guideline into two criteria, one for the u-verbs and one for the ru-verbs. And of course, if you don't know the distinction between u-verbs and ru-verbs, then that was also covered in a previous video, which you should definitely watch before watching this one, of course. So to get the negativeない form for u-verbs, first of all, we are going to consider the pre-mas form of an u-verb, then we're going to drop the mas. So for instance, if we have the verb kao, which is to buy, our pre-mas form of that verb is going to be kai, because the mas form itself is kaimasu, so we drop the mas and we just have kai. So once we have the pre-mas form of the u-verb, we are going to switch the e in the pre-mas form, which is basically the I, K-A-I. We take out the I, and we're either going to swap that with the a character, or in this case with kao, we're going to replace it with the wa character, because u-verbs in their pre-mas form will have the e character succeeding another consonant. For example, if we were to use the verb hanasu instead of kao, the mas form of hanasu is hanashimasu, which makes the pre-mas form of hanasu hanashi, and you can notice how the e character in hanashi is succeeding the sh consonant sound, but for kao we only have the e by itself, and in that case we're gonna switch the e with the wa. But if we were doing the conjugation for the nai form for hanasu instead, we would just replace the shi with sa, because we're just replacing the e with a, and the s is already there. We leave it there, so it turns from shi to sa. Okay, so you can see that things are getting pretty complicated already. We'll just do a really quick review of what I just said. So right now we're sticking strictly to u-verbs, and when we want to change u-verbs into the negativeない form, if the pre-mas form of that verb ends with an e without a preceding consonant, then we switch the e to wa. If the pre-mas form of the u-verb ends with e and it does succeed a consonant, then we simply just change the e to an a. So now we'll just provide a few examples of verbs conjugated into their negativeない form. So first up we have the verb iku, which we've used a lot throughout this video series so far. And of course it means to go. It's spelled e and ku. So we need to get the pre-mas form of this verb, which probably means we're just going to naturally derive the mas form first. So what is the mas form of iku? It is ikimasu, which makes the pre-mas form of ikimasu and iku iki. So you can see that the e in iki is succeeding a consonant in this case, which is the k letter. So we have iki. We're just going to switch the e into an a, which gives us ika. And then we're going to add the little phrase or whatever that is nai, which is why this is called the negativeない form. We add the nai at the end of the first step that we did, which gives us ikanai, and that is the casual negative form of the verb iku. Next we have the verb nomu, which is to drink. You can see that it's an u-verb. We're going to switch it into its mas form, which is nomimasu, which makes its pre-mas form nomi. So we have the e succeeding the m letter, which means it does have in fact a consonant before it. So we simply just switch the e out with an a character. So we have noma. Then of course we add the nai after that. So we have nomanai for the negative casual form of nomu. And now we have two cases of u-verbs that do not have the consonant before the e when we take the pre-mas form of them. For our first one, we have the verb ao, which means to meet, and we're going to change that to its mas form, which is aimasu. Pretty simple, which makes the pre-mas form of it just ai. And you can see that there isn't a consonant before the e here, so we are going to switch the e to a wa. and that gives us awa. Then we add the nai after that, so we have awanai, and that is the negative casual form of the verb o. So next we're going to do the verb that we covered in the beginning, or hinted at in the beginning, which is kao, which means to buy. We're going to change that to its mas form, which is kaimas, as I mentioned earlier already, so which makes the pre-mas form of that to be kai. Then we see that the the e doesn't have a consonant before it, so we switch that to a wa, so we have kawa. Then we add the nai after that, which makes it kawanai. So now we're going to move on to the negative casual form of ru-verbs, which is actually much easier and intuitive than doing the same thing for u-verbs. So for ru-verbs, we're just going to do the simple process of taking the mas form of the ru-verb and simply changing the mas at the end into nai. So because this is so easy, we'll just do two examples of two verbs, and for our first verb, we will use the word taberu, which is to eat. We take the mas form of taberu, which is tabemas. We take out the mas and we replace it with a nai, so we have tabenai, and that is the negative casual form of the verb taberu. Next, we'll do the verb miru, which means to see or to look, and we take the mas form of miru, which is mimas. We take out the mas and we put in the nai, and now we have minai. And now, as a last little rarity of its own, it's a little in its own subcategory, is the verb irasharu. And for this conjugation, irasharu is going to be one of those radical conjugations that belongs in a category of its own because it shows some weird differences from the regular guidelines that we use for u-verbs and ru-verbs. So irasharu, when it's in its mas form, it's irashaimasu, which makes the pre-mas form irashai. And if we follow the guidelines that I explained earlier, we could see that before the e there is no consonant, so we would have to switch e with wa instead of ah, but that is not the case. Instead of switching the e with a wa, we're gonna switch it with a ra, and it's gonna end up as irasharanai. And yeah, that's the tidbit to know for the pretty irregular verb irasharu. If we look at the mas form of it, it's kind of a misleading thing in that it doesn't follow the guideline that we explained earlier. And in that case, you could kind of consider the dictionary form of verbs to be a more reliable base when you're conjugating it into other forms. So that's all we have for this lesson, and it covers a really important topic. Like many previous ones, you're going to be using the negative form a lot in everyday conversations, so it's good to know. We went through a decent amount of examples, but of course you should immerse yourself in the many other kinds of verbs. Sooner or later, the process isn't going to be you switching it to the mas form, taking the pre-mas form, and then switching it with whatever, then adding nai at the end. It's going to turn into an intuitive process if you get enough exposure to all of the verbs and their conjugations, and that is true for all the conjugations, not just this negative casual form. So yes, keep practicing.